It was a moonlit night. The air was still, the stars hung lazily in the sky, and yet something stirred within me, a restlessness, a gnawing urge to do something impulsive. It was late, too late for most sensible people to be out and about, but the idea of taking a late-night drive seemed oddly tempting. The quiet roads and empty spaces called to me, promising solitude and maybe a brief escape from the mundane. I had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in town knew about that particular road, the one that wound through the thick forest just beyond the outskirts. People whispered about it in hushed tones, spinning tales about a phantom that haunted the place, lurking in the shadows. Some said it was the ghost of a man who had died in a terrible accident there years ago, doomed to wander forever. Others claimed he was something older, something darker, something not quite human. But rumors were just rumors. I didn't believe in ghosts. I had always dismissed the stories as the product of overactive imaginations and old folklore passed down over too many campfires. So, on that moonlit night, I decided to take a drive down that very road. I figured I'd prove to myself that there was nothing to be afraid of, that the tales were nothing more than baseless gossip. The moment I turned onto the road, however, a strange sensation washed over me. The trees seemed taller here, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, blocking out much of the moonlight. The deeper I drove, the darker it became. The road seemed to narrow, as if it were closing in around me. The silence grew heavier, almost suffocating. The rhythmic hum of the car's engine was the only sound, and even that seemed muted, as though the forest itself were absorbing it. I turned the radio on, hoping to break the eerie silence, but all I got was static. No music, no voices, just a low, hissing noise that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I quickly turned it off, preferring the uncomfortable quiet over the unsettling static. As I continued, the uneasiness grew. The road became more desolate, no sign of civilization in sight. I hadn't seen another car or house for miles. The trees crowded closer, their gnarled branches brushing against the roof of my car like brittle fingers. My headlights barely pierced the thick darkness ahead. And then I saw him. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. He appeared so suddenly, standing in the middle of the road, as if he had materialized out of thin air. My heart skipped a beat, my foot instinctively moving to the brake. The figure was tall and gaunt, his form silhouetted against the dark backdrop of the forest. His clothes were tattered, hanging loosely off his thin frame, swaying slightly in the breeze that I couldn't feel. I blinked, thinking maybe I was seeing things. Maybe it was just some drunkard or someone playing a prank. I honked the horn, a sharp, blaring sound that cut through the silence. "Get out of the way," I yelled, though my voice sounded small, swallowed up by the oppressive darkness. He didn't move. My headlights illuminated him fully now. His skin was pale, unnaturally so, almost gray, like he hadn't seen the light of day in years. His head was tilted downward, his face hidden beneath a mop of stringy, dark hair. He stood there, unmoving, like a statue carved from the night itself. Slowly, he began to lift his head. I froze, every instinct in my body screaming for me to look away, but I couldn't. His eyes, no, not eyes, but hollow, black voids where eyes should have been, stared back at me. His face was skeletal, skin pulled taut over sharp, angular bones. His lips were thin, stretched into what could only be described as a grotesque smile. A chill ran down my spine, and my entire body tensed. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched as the car surged forward. I swerved around him, the car veering dangerously close to the edge of the road. I kept my eyes ahead, too terrified to glance in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see him again. I didn't want to know if he was still there. For a few moments, nothing happened. The road ahead was empty, dark, and endless. My pulse gradually began to slow, though my hands were still trembling on the steering wheel. I forced myself to breathe, trying to calm the rapid beating of my heart. Maybe it was over. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. I pulled over to the side of the road, needing a moment to collect myself. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes, trying to shake off the lingering fear. But then I heard it. A soft, faint rustling sound coming from behind me. My eyes shot open, and I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was there. Dave, standing just behind the car, barely illuminated by the taillights, was the Phantom. His hollow eyes stared straight at me, his mouth twisted into that same nightmarish smile. My heart slammed against my chest as pure terror flooded my veins. I yanked the gear into drive, my foot pressing the pedal so hard I thought it might break. The car lurched forward, tires skidding on the gravel as I sped away. I drove recklessly, the road blurring before me as I tried to put as much distance as possible between myself and that. The road twisted and turned through the forest, and with every bend I felt the Phantom closing in. Suddenly I lost control. The car fishtailed wildly, veering off the road and crashing into a tree with a sickening thud. The impact jolted me forward, my head slamming against the steering wheel. Stars danced in my vision, and for a moment, everything went black. When I came to, the car was still. My head throbbed with pain, and blood trickled down my forehead. I was disoriented, confused, but one thing was clear: I needed to get out of here. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, growing louder with each passing second. My breath caught in my throat, and I forced myself to move, despite the pain. I limped back to the car. With a trembling hand, I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered for a moment, then roared to life. I didn't wait. I hit the gas, the car jerking forward as I sped back onto the road. My vision was blurred, both from the blood trickling down my face and the fear that clouded my mind. The road ahead seemed endless, a dark void stretching into nothingness. Every shadow, every flicker of light, felt like it was hiding something, like the Phantom was always just out of sight, waiting for me to stop. Finally, after what felt like hours of driving through the oppressive darkness, I saw the faint glow of a gas station up ahead. Relief washed over me, though the fear still clung to me like a shadow, its weight heavy in my chest. I pulled into the gas station, my body aching, and parked near the entrance. I stepped out of the car, still shaking, and approached the lone worker. He glanced at me, taking in my disheveled appearance. "What happened to you?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to tell him. "I was driving down that road through the forest," I said, my voice unsteady. "The one people say is haunted." His expression changed instantly. His face darkened. "You shouldn't have gone there. That place. It's not safe. People who take that road don't come back the same. Some don't come back at all." His words sent a chill through me. I thanked him, my nerves still on edge, and returned to my car. I drove straight home, never looking back. I parked the car and stumbled out, leaning heavily against the door as I tried to catch my breath. My heart was still pounding, my legs trembling beneath me. I glanced back toward the road, half expecting to see the Phantom lurking in the distance. But there was nothing, just the quiet, empty night. The Phantom was gone, or at least I hoped he was. I never drove that road again. Whatever I saw that night, whatever haunted that stretch of forest, it was real. I could feel it in my bones, in the cold sweat that still covered my skin whenever I thought about it. Some stories are more than just legends. Some roads are best left unexplored, and some phantoms never truly leave.